China has just launched a legal strike that could shake the space industry to its core, a staggering $1.5 trillion lawsuit against Elon Musk's SpaceX. This isn't just one of the largest legal claims in history, it's a direct challenge to the most dominant private space company on Earth. As news of the lawsuit broke, sources say Musk was sent into a full-blown meltdown, scrambling to respond to what could be a defining moment for his empire. But what exactly is China accusing SpaceX of doing to warrant such an astronomical figure? How is Musk defending himself? And what does this mean for the future of the space race between nations and private companies? Let's break down the allegations, the fallout, and what's at stake in one of the most explosive legal battles space exploration has ever seen. Details of the lawsuit. China is asking for $1.5 trillion in damages from SpaceX. This is one of the biggest lawsuits ever filed against a private company. Let's break down what's happening in this legal battle. The Chinese government claims that SpaceX's Starlink satellites are violating their national airspace. According to the lawsuit, these satellites regularly pass over Chinese territory without permission. China says this is like having thousands of foreign objects flying over their country without asking first. The lawsuit focuses on three main complaints. First, China claims SpaceX is spying on their military bases and important buildings using cameras on the satellites. They say Elon Musk's company is collecting secret information and sharing it with the American government. Second, China argues that Starlink satellites are creating dangerous space junk. When old satellites break down or crash into each other, they leave behind thousands of small pieces that float around Earth. These pieces can damage other satellites or even the Chinese space station where their astronauts live and work. Third, the lawsuit states that SpaceX is unfairly blocking China from using parts of space. With thousands of Starlink satellites already in orbit and plans for many more, China says SpaceX is taking up too much room in space without sharing. The $1.5 trillion that China wants includes money for what they call national security damages, cleanup costs for space debris, and lost opportunities for their own space programs. They're also asking for SpaceX to remove many of their satellites from orbit. China is using both international space laws and United Nations agreements to support their case. They point to the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, which says that space belongs to everyone and no country can claim it as their own. China argues that SpaceX, with support from the US government, is essentially claiming ownership of large areas of space. The lawsuit was filed in the International Court of Justice, which handles disputes between countries. This is unusual because SpaceX is a company, not a country. China argues that because SpaceX works closely with the US government on many projects, the company is acting as an extension of America. Legal experts are divided on whether China has a strong case. Some say that satellites passing over countries has been normal practice since the space age began. Others point out that the sheer number of Starlink satellites, currently over 4,000 with plans for up to 42,000, creates a new situation that existing laws didn't anticipate. If China wins this lawsuit, it could change how companies operate in space. SpaceX might have to limit its satellite network or pay huge amounts of money. It could also affect other companies planning their own satellite networks. SpaceX and Elon Musk have responded by saying the lawsuit is without merit and that Starlink follows all international laws. They argue that their satellites benefit people worldwide by providing internet access to remote areas, and that China is simply trying to slow down American progress in space. So what exactly has China alleged, and why are they demanding $1.5 trillion in damages? China's grievances against SpaceX. China has several big complaints against SpaceX that led to this massive lawsuit. Their main issue is that SpaceX rockets are dropping debris that's falling onto Chinese territory. According to Chinese officials, parts of SpaceX rockets have crashed in rural areas of China at least 3 times in the past year. One piece reportedly damaged a small farm building, while another landed dangerously close to a school. The Chinese government claims SpaceX isn't being careful enough about where their rocket parts land after launches. They say Elon Musk's company knows some pieces will fall back to Earth, but doesn't do enough to control where they come down. China points out that most space agencies try to make sure rocket debris falls into oceans, far from people. Another complaint involves Starlink satellites. China says these thousands of small satellites are creating too much traffic in space. They've provided records showing their space station had to make emergency moves twice last year to avoid hitting Starlink satellites. Chinese officials argue this is dangerous for their astronauts and costs them fuel and time. China also claims SpaceX is breaking international space laws. They point to the Outer Space Treaty, which says countries are responsible for what their companies do in space. Since SpaceX is an American company, China argues the US government should be making sure SpaceX follows the rules. The lawsuit includes photos and tracking data that supposedly show SpaceX rocket parts in Chinese territory. They've collected metal fragments they claim came from Falcon 9 rockets, and they've had scientists test these pieces to prove they're from SpaceX. China is particularly upset about an incident last March when they say a large rocket booster crashed near a small village. Nobody was hurt, but they claim it started a small fire that burned about 2 acres of farmland. They've included statements from villagers who heard the crash and firefighters who put out the flames. The Chinese Space Agency says they've sent multiple warnings to SpaceX about these problems, but nothing has changed. They claim to have emails and letters showing they tried to solve this peacefully before filing the lawsuit, and some experts think China might have other reasons for the lawsuit too. SpaceX's Starlink network could potentially give internet access to people in countries with strict internet controls, including China. The Chinese government might see this as a threat to their control of information. China is also developing its own space program and might view SpaceX as competition. They've been building their own space station and planning missions to the moon and Mars, areas where SpaceX is also working. The lawsuit asks for money to cover damages already caused and demands that SpaceX change how they operate to prevent future problems. China wants SpaceX to better control where rocket debris lands and to coordinate more closely with other countries about the paths of their satellites. SpaceX, however, isn't backing down. SpaceX's response and Elon Musk's stance. When news of China's massive lawsuit hit the media, SpaceX didn't stay quiet for long. The company quickly released a statement calling the lawsuit completely baseless and an attempt to slow down global progress in space technology. SpaceX's legal team pointed out that the company had followed all international space laws and had proper permits for every satellite launch. Elon Musk, never one to hold back his thoughts, took to social media with a more direct approach. This is nothing but a political move, he posted, gaining millions of views within hours. SpaceX has created thousands of jobs and connected millions of people to the internet. We're not going to be bullied. In a press conference held at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California, Musk appeared visibly frustrated but determined. He explained that Starlink satellites were designed to avoid space debris and had built-in systems to prevent collisions. He showed reporters simple diagrams of how the satellites could change their path if needed and emphasized that they burn up completely when they fall back to Earth at the end of their life. "We've been transparent about our operations from day one," Musk said, holding up a model of a Starlink satellite. "Every launch is coordinated with space agencies around the world, including those in Asia." SpaceX's legal defense started taking shape as they hired a team of international lawyers specializing in space law. Their main argument centered on the fact that space doesn't belong to any single country, and that China's claims of ownership over certain orbital paths had no legal standing under the Outer Space Treaty that both the United States and China had signed. Behind the scenes, Musk called emergency meetings with his top executives. According to people who were there, he paced the room saying, "We need to keep launching. We can't let this slow us down." He was worried that delays would hurt their plans to provide internet to remote areas and fund their bigger goal of sending people to Mars. SpaceX also reached out to the US government for support. The company reminded officials that Starlink had helped Ukraine maintain communications during the war with Russia, showing how important their technology was for national security. Musk's public strategy shifted as the days went on. He began sharing more educational content about how Starlink worked and the care SpaceX took to be responsible in space. He invited independent experts to inspect their facilities and review their collision avoidance procedures. "I'm happy to meet with Chinese officials anytime, anywhere," Musk offered in an interview. "We should be working together in space, not fighting in courtrooms." SpaceX also released data showing that their satellites had performed thousands of collision avoidance maneuvers, proving their commitment to space safety. As pressure mounted, Musk remained confident in public, but reportedly told his team, "This is going to be a long battle. But remember, we're building technology that will make humanity a multi-planet species that's worth fighting for." Still, the stakes are enormous, and the fallout could reshape the future of SpaceX. Implications for SpaceX and international relations. The lawsuit against SpaceX has created a storm of problems that could change how the company operates for years to come. If China wins even part of this massive $1.5 trillion case, SpaceX might have to pay huge amounts of money that would drain their bank accounts. This could force the company to slow down their rocket launches, delay their plans to go to Mars, and possibly even stop some of their satellite projects. SpaceX currently works with NASA and other space agencies around the world. These partnerships might become shaky if the lawsuit drags on. Some countries might worry about working with a company that's in legal trouble. NASA might have to think twice about giving SpaceX more contracts for taking astronauts to the International Space Station. For Elon Musk, this is just one more headache in his busy life. He runs several big companies like Tesla and X, formerly Twitter, and this lawsuit could take away time and energy he needs for those businesses. Investors in his companies might get nervous, causing stock prices to drop. Some people are already questioning if Musk is trying to do too many things at once. The lawsuit is also making waves in how the United States and China work together in space. For years, these two countries have had a mix of competition and cooperation when it comes to space exploration. Sometimes they share information, but mostly they race to achieve new goals first. This legal battle could make that relationship much worse. China has been building up its own space program quickly. They've put astronauts in orbit, landed rovers on the moon and Mars, and built their own space station called Tiangong. If relations get worse because of this lawsuit, we might see less sharing of scientific discoveries and more secrecy between the two countries. Other countries are watching closely to see what happens. The European Space Agency, Japan, India, and Russia all have their own space programs and partnerships with both American and Chinese space organizations. They might have to choose sides if the conflict gets worse. The lawsuit also raises questions about who owns what in space. There aren't many clear rules about space property, and this case might force countries to create new laws about satellites, space debris, and who can use different orbits around Earth. For regular people, this might mean changes in services that use satellites, like GPS navigation, weather forecasting, and internet connections. If SpaceX has to reduce the number of Starlink satellites they launch, some areas might not get the internet service they were promised. The aerospace industry as a whole is paying close attention. Companies like Boeing, Blue Origin, and Rocket Lab compete with SpaceX, and this lawsuit could change the playing field. If SpaceX struggles, these other companies might get more business, but they could also face similar legal challenges in the future. What started as a dispute over satellites has grown into something that could reshape how countries cooperate in space, how private companies operate beyond Earth, and even how everyday technology works for people around the world. As the dust settles around this unprecedented lawsuit, several possible futures emerge for SpaceX, Elon Musk, and the entire space industry. Let's look at what might happen next. Future outlook and potential outcomes. The most likely outcome is some kind of settlement between SpaceX and China. Few legal cases actually go through a complete trial, especially ones this big. SpaceX might agree to pay a much smaller amount than the $1.5 trillion demanded, perhaps a few $billion, while also promising to be more careful about satellite placement in the future. This would allow both sides to save face and avoid years of expensive legal battles. If the case does go to court, SpaceX could win completely if they prove their satellites pose no real danger to China's space station. This would be a huge relief for the company, but might make China's government angry, possibly leading to other forms of payback against American companies. On the other hand, if SpaceX loses badly, the financial hit could be devastating. While they probably wouldn't have to pay the full $1.5 trillion, even a judgment of $50 to $100 billion could force SpaceX to sell parts of the company, delay major projects like the Mars mission, or even file for bankruptcy protection. Musk might need to pull money from his other companies like Tesla to keep SpaceX afloat. The timeline matters too. This type of international lawsuit could drag on for 3 to 5 years or more. During that time, SpaceX might struggle to raise new funding since investors hate uncertainty. Their Starlink internet service might grow more slowly than planned, disappointing customers waiting for coverage in remote areas. For the broader space industry, this case could create new rules about how satellites operate. Insurance costs for satellite launches might go up for everyone. Companies might need to spend more money on systems that help satellites avoid each other, adding to the cost of space projects. Other countries with space programs are watching closely. India, which has growing space ambitions, might see an opportunity to offer itself as a more reliable partner than either the US or China. The European Space Agency might push harder for its own independent satellite network networks to avoid getting caught in the middle of this fight. For everyday people, the effects might take longer to notice. If Starlink's growth slows down, rural internet improvements could be delayed. Weather forecasting might be slightly less accurate if fewer satellites are launched. Prices for satellite TV or internet services might increase as companies pass along higher costs. One interesting possibility is that this lawsuit could actually speed up international agreements about space traffic management. Countries might finally create clear rules about who can put satellites where, how to handle space junk, and what happens when accidents occur in orbit. For Elon Musk personally, this crisis might force him to focus more on SpaceX and less on his other companies. Some investors and board members at Tesla or X might even push for him to step back from those companies to deal with this existential threat to SpaceX. Whatever happens, this lawsuit marks a turning point in how we think about space. The final frontier is no longer just about exploration and science. It's becoming a place where business interests, national pride, and legal battles all collide.